Welcome to Follow-Up Friday, where we wrap up the week's events. I'm Brian Pincus. Now, you probably noticed throughout the week the background behind me changing a little bit here and there. That's because we're about 90% done moving into our new studio. Now, throughout the week, we talked about a lot of different things. First up, we talked about what one thing would you change that could maybe impact, if not maybe the next week or the next month, maybe your entire life. What would that one thing be? Welcome to Motivation Monday. On the ride into work today, I was thinking about this time very early on in the company. We were about to send off our first proposal when one of my good friends asked me, "Are you sure you want to do this?" And I was really puzzled at the time. I didn't know why he was asking it. So I said, "I don't understand. Why would you say that?" And he said, "Well, if we fail, we are gonna be in big trouble because this is a big initiative. I mean, I don't know, maybe we could get sued, who knows?" And I'll never forget that. You know, far too often we hold ourselves back from big challenges because we're afraid. This week, I want you to think about something that you've put off, something that might impact you for the rest of the year or perhaps the rest of your life that you haven't tackled. I want you to go out and tackle that thing this week and let's see it change your life. The one thing I'm trying to change is my weight, but hopefully some people are changing their habits online because ransomware is becoming a big problem. Oh, it's Monday? Is it over, you ask? No. In case you've been living under a rock, about 1 o'clock Friday morning, a major ransomware attack called WannaCry was launched, which later that day would have many of my IT friends crying because it meant that they would be spending Mother's Day weekend either addressing major system outages or at the very least reevaluating their patch management, disaster recovery, and incident response plans. By the way, the name isn't really WannaCry, it's WannaDecryptor, and the Los Angeles Angels aren't really in Los Angeles, they're in Anaheim. In either case, when my mom stopped by for Mother's Day and wanted to talk about malware tech's ransomware sinkhole, I suddenly realized how far into the twilight zone we had sank. The crazy thing is that from what I hear, this attack didn't propagate by users clicking links or some master social engineering method, but rather it seems that this attack propagated by people who failed to apply patches. No, not that kind of patch. Yeah, that kind of patch. These patches have been out for months and many have failed to implement them, and so that's what led to the problems. Okay, now on to a question I've had all weekend. Why did these bumbling idiots include a function which made it so easy to disable their entire master plan? I mean, after all, this problem was thwarted because prior to encrypting the files, the ransomware would basically check to see whether or not it could order a small chai tea latte from Starbucks using a non-existent server. Okay, well, obviously it had nothing to do with Starbucks, but you get the idea. It would try to contact a non-existent server and would stop if it was able to contact the server. Once someone registered the domain, the attack was finished. Okay, so now, why was it so easy to shut down? Well, as my good friend Cody educated me this morning, it seems that this measure was likely built in to try to protect the malware from being identified by malware research tools. I'm not going to go into all the details on here, but suffice to say that new versions of this are already out in the wild with some simple modifications, and more are coming. Well, if that wasn't a big enough problem, our politicians seem to just ignore what everybody else wants and do what they want. And so by the end of this week, they've basically destroyed the entire internet. Go ahead and watch. Breaking news, can you hear me now? Well, probably not, because former Verizon attorney and current head of the FCC was able to get his way as FCC commissioners voted more than 2-1 to roll back net neutrality regulations. Honestly, I'm really pissed. There were so many comments posted to the FCC site against this that at one point the site couldn't handle the load and crashed. Remember, these regulations ensure that internet service providers treat all content equally. With these restrictions rolled back, we could start to see internet service providers asserting themselves into what you view on the internet. It's truly a sad development on epic proportions. Some have said that the FCC needs an act of Congress to make these changes. I don't know, but in either case, it's a really sad development. Well, now that there's no more internet regulations, that reminds me of Microsoft's evil plan to take over the universe. Welcome to Throwback Thursday. It is almost Friday and I'm Brian Pincus. Today we go back to May 18th, 1998, when the Department of Justice shifted its attention from the dating habits of presidential interns to the internet browser wars. Microsoft released Explorer, sorry, old tech support joke. Anyway, they released it to compete against the perennial favorite Netscape Navigator. The two would wage war in an epic internet battle to become the home for internet trolls everywhere. Up until that point, Netscape's competitors were basically non-existent, so this was definitely an unwelcome challenge. At the time, I remember saying to myself, Microsoft came to play hardball. Why? They simply bundled the browser with their operating system and gave Internet Explorer away for the low price of free, whereas Netscape was charging for their browser. Since it came with their operating system, consumers also didn't need to spend hours downloading a browser the first time they finally figured out how to get that modem thing working. The Department of Justice felt that these actions constituted anti-competitive practices, so on May 18, 1998, they went to trial in the United States versus Microsoft Corporation. The case went on for several years as both sides refused to back down. It wouldn't be completely settled until November 2nd, 2001, when the Department of Justice reached a final agreement with Microsoft. In the end, very little changed. Microsoft agreed to a handful of concessions, and besides, by then, Netscape was a fraction of its previous self. Almost a year to the day after the case was settled, Netscape released its code by providing the foundation for the open source browser project called Firefox. Now, Firefox is still in use today, some 53 versions later. It's strange to think about how Chrome was missing from this entire fight, but remember, Google wasn't even born yet, and besides, they would have their hands full with the small task of cataloging the entire internet. It took Google until 2008 to jump into Browser Wars v2, which didn't go quite as well for Microsoft this time around. When will Browser War v3 heat up? Well, who knows? It's amazing to think about how things change over the years, and now that Google's involved and Google's a big heavyweight, whereas Microsoft is still there, but they're the junior guy. It's really going to be interesting to see over the next few years what happens. That's it for Follow Up Friday. Have a great weekend. Go ahead and subscribe, like, comment, and I'll see you next week.